Hello and welcome to another episode of Musings. I'm Amrita Ghosh, and today we have with us Bhakti Shringarpure, Associate Professor of English at University of Connecticut. She's also the Editor-in-Chief of Warscapes and author of Cold War Assemblages, Decolonization to Digital, 2019. Her edited works include Literary Sudans, an anthology of literature from Sudan and South Sudan, 2016, Imagine Africa, Volume 3 in 2017, and Mediterranean Migrant Crossings from 2018. Her co-edited volume, Insurgent Feminisms, Women Right War, is forthcoming in 2021 with Mantle Books. She was the recipient of the Fulbright U.S. Scholar Award 2019-2020 to teach and conduct research in Kenya. She's currently editor of a short book series called Decolonize That, Handbooks for the Revolutionary Overthrow of Embedded Colonial Ideas, which is being published by OR Books in New York. Welcome to Musings, Bhakti.
Thank you so much.
So I'm going to start for our viewers to situate the topic for our conversation today. Decolonization. Why is it so relevant and significant today at the present moment? And how would you start by defining the term decolonization?
Yeah, that's a sort of a huge question, but I'll try to explain a little bit. I think one of the things that's happening now is that we're seeing this word pop up in various protests, various initiatives in different institutions and so on. So there is a feeling as if something new is going on. But the truth is that the word has been around for a long time and has been part of some of my research, of course, for the last decade or more. Decolonization in the official sense, as most people would know it, is when a country gains independence from its master, from its colonizer. So the period, the short period of partition in India would be seen as the decolonization period of India and Pakistan, for example. So usually they say decolonization is a very short-lived moment where there's a transfer of power, there's a change in government, change in constitution. But sometime in the 70s and 80s, there came about this idea that even though colonialism is over, all the colonial structures are still with us. And in fact, it is seeping into many aspects of our life. And then you had the groundbreaking book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's a brilliant Kenyan writer and scholar and philosopher. And he used the phrase, decolonizing the mind. And that's kind of exploded as a kind of how to take colonialism out of your consciousness, out of your psychology, how to kind of decolonize your own self and do away with these kinds of things that are, hampering our freedom, how we think about ourselves and our world, how we perceive how we look or what we eat, and so on and so forth. So I think this is where the shift happened. And here also the shift happens from saying decolonization is not this activity or political event, but it's actually a verb. So you're decolonizing something, either yourself or an institution or a field of study and so on. And I think that's the way I like to use it now. The last 10 years, we have seen a resurgence in the term because we have seen a resurgence in kind of the ethic of revolution. We've seen the Arab Springs, we've seen Antifa, we've seen Black Lives Matter protests, and then along that, decolonize has also started to trend. In fact, just today I looked at Instagram and hashtag decolonize had 500,000 tags or something like that. So it's a lot, So it's starting to be applied very liberally, and for the most part, I support that. Some of it I feel I'm critical, but I think it's here now, and I think people are very conscious of things like decolonizing museums. There's been reports in France to return artifacts stolen from Africa. And you hear a lot, of course, that matters to you and me, Amrita, is decolonizing the curriculum, which is something we employed in academia and as professors have to think about as well.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the introduction, and because I know of and follow your series, Decolonize This. Um, for our viewers at Space.Inc., tell us about the series from Warscapes. And related to the first question, what do you aim to do through this series? Because
Right.
obviously you mentioned the curriculum and academia, but this is beyond that in some ways.
Yeah, it's true. I think the first goal is to try to reach a wider audience. So that's how we conceived of it, and it really emerged from it really emerged out of the book series. So it's Decolonize That. And it emerged out of this book series that I conceived a year and a half ago, which is it's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek, slightly humorous title. We call it Decolonize That: Handbooks for the Revolutionary Overthrow of Embedded Colonial Ideas. So it's a long title, and it's meant to kind of make you smile a little bit. But the truth is, I'm very serious about it, as are my publishers, as are the almost 9 writers that are commissioned to write short books, and they're very site specific. Each book deals with a specific site. Sometimes the sites are surprising, sometimes they are things we need to do. The first one is going to be Decolonize Hipsters, and everyone's like, why are you putting hipsters under the bus? What have hipsters done to us? All they have is beards, and they brew some good beer. But actually, the truth is, hipsters are steeped in a kind of whiteness paradigm, and the author is going to kind of look at that. And that was also my co-host, Greg Piero, who did the series, web series, we called it. And we had 5 sessions where we looked at different topics like syllabi, we looked at journalism, we looked at, I can't even remember now, protests and things like that. And I think the idea, which one?
Multiculturalism one was there.
Oh, multiculturalism, that was interesting as well. So the idea was to make the term accessible, and to also make the term available to people who feel they want to do something, they want to participate in protest, right? That this is not just some old third world term from another time of anti-colonial revolutions, that in fact this term is current, it's here. What do we do with it? How do we explain it more? How do we engage it more as part of our daily lives? We are all implicated in all kinds of things like gentrification, or certain kinds of relationships or friendships, and we are surrounded by inequalities and so on. So part of the way is to kind of become more fluent in understanding it, think about it at the level of activism and protest in a clearer way, and to just kind of create awareness. And that's why there was a public element to the programming, and we ended up reaching quite a large audience, and we were pleased with how it came out.
I want to talk about the currency of the term that you mentioned at the present, that it has gained a certain kind of relevance and significance. And on the contrary, there is this sort of voice of critique that is also emerging, that the term is way too much out there and it has lost its real significance, and everything is about decolonizing this or that. And I think we saw that happening on social media, that some say that it is used at times when it really means deconstructing something. How do we respond to that kind of critique when surely, as you mentioned before, the structures of colonial thinking are still deeply embedded within us? Any element we think of, structures of food, fashion, culture, anything that we can think of.
Yeah, I mean, you're very kind to say that, there have been critiques and so on. I think what you're trying to say is that the term has become trendy. And I agree. I think finding 500,000 tags on Instagram using this term, I think we know something has gone a bit awry, right? So I'm happy to kind of tackle that. And one of the things that I was doing in my web series was that we had, before the guests came on, we did this tiny segment where we looked at fake decolonization, and it was fun. But I was also trying to point out, what has real political currency and what is trying to benefit and profit from something that's trendy, right? And at the end of the day, we have seen that happen now in the last couple of decades with feminism. Feminism is trendy. Look at Beyonce. Look at Chimamanda Adichie. At the end of the day, her words, "We should all be feminists," showed up on a T-shirt that was $700 and it was Christian Dior. So so things become trendy. That doesn't mean they lose their meaning. That's the first thing I'll say. And decolonization similarly has also become like that. And I think I would identify 2 or 3 types of fake decolonization. The first was something very funny recently that I observed, which was this call on Instagram by an ambassador, by a brand ambassador of Lululemon yoga pants. And she was asking people to do decolonizing gender workshops. And this person had all the kind of vocabulary down, we have to fight colonialism, we have to fight patriarchy. But at the end, what I think she was doing was essentially promoting Lululemon pants. And, the history of Lululemon is unfortunately so fraught because the founder has in the past said that his pants are not built for women of all sizes, that in fact, he was promoting something very crude called the thigh gap and said Lululemon pants will fit those people. And, he's generally been known to say quite messed up comments and stuff like that. So that's a kind of very obvious fake decolonization. We can laugh at that. We can say, we don't want to join this workshop. This person is profiting. But then there's, 2 other kinds of more dangerous fake decolonizations. And one is, of course, this kind of diversity initiatives at universities. And as a scholar of color and so on, and I don't know if you've experienced this, I find that we're constantly put on these sort of committees to make these changes happen, and you do all this extra work, and I'm happy to do the work. But at the end of the day, the win is for the admin, and they get to show that they have a very diverse committee and that they did this or that. And real outcomes are still to come out of that. And there's a lot of tokenism and extractive labor involved in that. So that's one type of decolonization, or decolonize the curriculum, decolonize the university initiative that I'm suspicious of. And then the final one I would say is the kind we see with the French, recently the trends in France. And the reason I was observing that in France, because they just had a long, intense documentary on decolonization called Blood and Tears. And it was wonderful, but it was also very exploitative imagery. And it kind of took decolonization and took all the meaning and resistance out of it and turned it into kind of a military history. So that is one way to kind of change what decolonization really is, which is a verb, which is an active engagement with something. And also Emmanuel Macron, the French president, had commissioned this report to look at all these artifacts in French museums that came from Africa. And he was like, yes, we are going to return them, and it's time to be decolonial and so on. And of course, they found like 27,000 artifacts or something that need to be returned. 9 of those were promised that they will return, and 1 has been actually returned. So, if that's not fake, I don't know what is. So these are the things that sort of worry me. And I think we have to be cognizant. That's all I can say.
Thank you for that. I'm also thinking how the term has seeped into our daily lives in terms of, for example, food. And I was recently reading this book called Decolonize Your Diet, Plant-Based Mexican-American Recipes for Health and Healing. And the book itself is a glimpse of how American food has been colonized, and to re-include, preserve the food of the native. So that was the kind of the track of the book. Yes. It made me think, how does this kind of decolonizing food really impact people, our everyday, to rethink identity and other kinds of power structures that we inherit? And to add to that, are there other ways that we can decolonize what we eat?
Right. Yeah, I mean, this topic is very close to my heart, but just as much as it's close to my heart, it's like not my expertise. But I will, I do have an author lined up to do a decolonize vegetarianism
Mm.
for my book series. So I'm kind of learning a bit from her and also from what's in the air. And years ago on Warscapes, I did a special issue as well on food. And I think this is like a fundamental thing. And there are two things that I'm interested in when I think about that. I'm not a huge fan of let's return to indigenous foods because I think literally that ship has sailed, but and I also think that the organic food industry has been exploiting that line quite a lot. So, by finding these superfoods and so on. So that's one issue of food waste that we have to be cautious about. And one example I'll give you is that I used to be a huge fan of quinoa. I'm still a fan of quinoa, which is superfood and it's wonderful and it's healthy and so on and so forth. I'm trying to force my children to eat it and all this. But then, I realized that actually it was creating malnutrition in Bolivian populations because they're so used to eating their own food, but it was all getting imported and or exported. What's the word? It was all being sent off basically to first world spaces. And creating all kinds of problems within their community. So when we think about like chia seeds and these kind of weird superfoods, I think we have to ask which communities we are really extracting them from. So I think that's one thing to think about to decolonize food. The other thing is, of course, on a daily level is like the hierarchies within food, like French food is classy and Indian food is stinky and Mexican food is street and Chinese food is just takeout. These kind of racial hierarchies are deeply upsetting and they're deeply embedded. I mean, even the most radical, progressive, cool person is like suddenly at the end of the day being like, I'm having a big celebration. I'm going to take you all to a French restaurant. Arey, why? Is there no other, what else is there? Why this Eurocentrism in how we think about food? And then I get, of course, upset also with Indians or people from my own family and so on who have all kinds of attitudes about Indian food itself. Oh, that's not the way you cook vegetables, or aren't Indian sweets a bit too, sticky and sweet, things like that. So I think we do need to think where we are getting these ideas from and why we embrace certain foods and why we think certain foods are strange and so on, and the final thing I will say, because I recently wrote an article on it, food is cultural heritage, recipes are cultural heritage, and I did an article on migrant women who who are transcribing and writing up their recipes. And it's a way for them to connect with their lost home. And it's a way for them to keep their heritage alive. So it's such a precious, beautiful thing. And those are not recipes we may connect with. But if we can open and decolonize and stop being obsessed with European food, we could probably, access those kind of very beautiful things,
I really appreciate that response because, my go-to example about this is, and I've talked about this to my students also. I literally had this moment where I wanted samosas. I went back to India, and the group of people I was meeting, they were hell-bent on giving me wine and cheese. And that moment, I really go back to thinking what had just happened, because it's a certain kind of imagination that possesses what we should be doing instead of what this person wanted in the first place.
Yeah. And, I don't want to be the one like defending the United States in any way, but there is nothing worse than some random Europeans saying Americans have no food traditions. That's just a whole, I'm just like, how do you utter that, that sentence? So it's kind of like, on many levels, this functions. And at the end of the day, it's a function of class, even maybe. We learn to talk like this because we believe we are of a certain class and things like that, and look down on some sort of taste. It comes down to like, what's good taste? And I'm classy, I have good taste, So yeah, I have a very low tolerance for this.
I think that is very true. And, I want to switch it to even fashion because, the conversation about fashion is how it intersects sometimes the line between decolonizing and even fetishizing something that becomes blurry, that what we wear. Um, and I'm thinking about the beauty and fashion industry. Is it about finding counter narratives to already established yardsticks about these things, fashion or beauty? Or is there something larger at stake when we say, let's decolonize fashion or beauty?
Gosh, I know very little about this. I'm sure I think about it, but I don't know how I would articulate it. Recently the thing, of course, when you say that, the thing that comes to my mind is like sweatshops in Sri Lanka and Vietnam, and how in the name of those sweatshops, we have ethical fashion, Primark and brands like H&M and so on will have those cheap goods, and they claim to be at the front lines of ethical fashion. But actually there's a whole problem around it. But I think fashion, again, we end up in this good taste, bad taste scenario and class consciousness and so on, right? I don't know how one necessarily goes about decolonizing fashion until you decolonize like what we think of as our beauty ideals or body image, and become inclusive of different body types, different ways of looking at humans and knowing that they are different. And so I think that's like the first approach. But the other thing is, I also remain cautious about, here's a designer from this part of the world and they are making this ethical fashion, buy from here, don't buy from there. I'm never sure how to kind of consider a move to decolonize when it's tied up with buying something or somewhere,
Yes.
So that's, I think, another issue we run into, like where to buy something that's ethical, or what makeup to buy, or what things like that. So I do wonder about that. I don't have a very a good answer, I think, to this, but maybe you have some thoughts.
I was thinking you brought into the whole, you brought the aspect about the problematic labor history when it comes to fashion itself. And I was also thinking that, the fetishizing part of it, I had a short series about the sari, and I was talking about how sari itself, when there is this othering of the woman in the sari also, that, there is this, sometimes there's this very problematic notion that it's a patriarchal garment and it restricts mobility and movement. And of course, it's, a sweeping generalization without knowing anything about the history of the sari. But, wearing the sari itself then begets certain kinds of problems with it, that who wears it and in what context one wears it becomes a certain kind of different gaze. And so, that it's a problematic question about how we can decolonize that. But I think imagination, we come back to how colonized the imaginations we inhere.
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. It makes me think of this cartoon that was going around at some point, which is two women on a subway, and one is in a full burqa, and she's snarkily looking at this other woman, and that other woman is in like a summer shorts like Daisy Dukes and like a bikini, and they're like, oh my God, look at her, poor thing, each one thinking the other is caught in kind of a patriarchal system, and of course, I mean, this all for me, the way to think about it is all the kind of drama around veils and Islam, and how much we obsess over women in veils and things like that. And I've taught so many times, I've taught who Muslim women, why do Muslim women need saving, by Leela Abu Lughod, which is a wonderful book. And it's always like, at the end of the day, you have to, when I have Western students, American students, I have to tell them, like, I cannot tell my mom, who comes from a particular generation, who is very fond of her collection of saris, to put on a bathing suit and be like, hey, mom, I've liberated you. Here we are in the south of France, and go ahead, be in a bikini. I mean, she'll slap me. I mean, this is not emancipation. And I think at the end of the day, it is about the imagination, and to not think of freedom as a European construct, right? At the end of the day, and you have to think about it through so many different layers, I guess.
I think
I see what question you asked.
I think, I'm thinking about my mother also, with the example that you gave. And long ago, when I was in grad school and learning all these theories that, were really shaping me up and shocking me also at the same time. And I went to my mother and I said that, why do you wear the sindoor? And she still does. Not in a very prominent way, but she does. And then she was quite taken aback and she said, why are you wearing the ring? So, it was like, you cannot just compare the two. As you said, that the example of the cartoon is a classic one.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So I want to ask a final question about decolonization itself. And so much has been said about it. Now it is more than ever current and important. And I think, for me and my work too, I completely agree with you that it's something in an ongoing process. It's not obviously stopped with the ending of colonization. But the temporality or the time framing of decolonization, there have been moments, and I speak from looking at and studying India, when a certain movement aligned with the politics started renaming streets that they were once with British names. For example, in Delhi, Connaught Place, the big circle, turned into Rajiv Chowk. What does this imply in terms of the timing or temporality of decolonization? Surely not that we have to return to a place of pre-colonial time.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I only feel frustration. I was a teenager when they renamed everything in Bombay, when the fascist Hindu fundamentalist party, Shiv Sena, came into power, and the Babri Masjid riots had just happened. It was a turning point for everybody my age, or, we all were forced to ask some hard questions about a country that was constantly promoting things like unity and diversity, and we are so secular. You grow up with movies like Amar Akbar Anthony, where each brother is of a different religion, yet they love each other. We grow up with these kind of ideas, and then, of course, after what happened in Ayodhya and the violence that followed, we had to have a reckoning, right? So I feel, within the Indian context, first of all, I have to say that each context is localized. And I think within the Indian context, a lot of this has been exploitation and vote garnering from these various parties, right? Because there were massive administrative costs to this. And, nobody thought of them as British names. But of course, when you think about the American South and Confederate monuments and statues, that's a different thing.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that's a living knowledge of something that's going on at the end of the day, So in India, when I think about it, I ask, what is, in a country that's so casteist, for example, what is within the public architecture, within the culture of naming, that's troubling to the common man, right? I don't have the answer to that. But what is kind of impeding that person's daily movement, or making them remember their place in society, their small place in society, or what violence is a monument doing upon the person? So in India, I think the answer is never going to be whether it's Connaught Place or Rajiv Chowk, right? But I think within the context of the monuments must fall and the names must be changed, I think there is something important about that movement, especially when we know that violence towards Black people in the United States and in Europe is rampant, and it's ugly, and it's absolutely awful, right? And I was actually in a different conversation about monuments, about monumentality and their effect on us. And one of the interesting things about that is that when you're part of name changing, when you're part of monuments falling, it's not like one day 50 people decide, I'm going to make this monument fall. You can have that moment when a group of people decides we have to destroy or desecrate something. But the truth is, for a monument to be taken down, it's a process. You have to make an application. You have to have the tools. You have to figure out where the monument is going to go, what's going to go up in its place. And I think a lot of these conversations have been very productive in the United States in building communities, building solidarities. And I just haven't seen that process within the Indian context, So I feel that it's a very local issue, and each one has its very localized solution. So I think that would be my answer to that. I think it's very context specific. I don't think just going back to some pre-colonial name is a band-aid. It's a weird solution. It's not even a band-aid. I don't know what it is,
Thank you so much for this conversation.